Joining me is the Tuesday panel, Louise Elliott, business consultant and Hobart City Councillor, and Will Kingston, host of Australiana, a weekly podcast from the Spectator Australia on politics and culture. Will, the government is priding itself on putting a lid on these things so it can, boast of better relations than China than under that silly Morrison government, more trade. Seems to me a very dangerous call.
It is a dangerous call, Andrew. There are some things that are more important than how many kilograms of beef and lobster that we can sell to Asian customers. And one of those is standing up for Australian values. We, as in the Australian media and political establishment, I think have our heads in the sand on China because the consequences are very scary. But consider this, it is more likely than not that China will try and retake Taiwan before the end of the decade. It is more likely than not that the US will intervene militarily on the side of Taiwan, and it is more likely than not, as a result of those two things, that Australia will need to make a choice. And I really hope that we are on the right side of that choice in standing up for our values. I fear we may not be when you see this sort of kowtowing from the Albanese government. But assuming that that stuff does happen, we need to make sure that we're economically independent of China, at least as much as possible, and that we're militarily ready for those consequences. I fear at the moment that we're not getting the right messaging from the Albanese government in that regard.
Louise Elliott, I mean, it seems to me that the years of China bullying Australia has in fact worked because this government now doesn't want to say boo to that very militant goose. It won't speak up. Now, it's interesting that the ranking member of the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee has just called out this Chinese attack in much stronger terms than our own Prime Minister did. Jim Risch said China's latest provocation on the high sea, this time directed at Australia, is more than risky operational behaviour. It is an act of aggression undertaken in international waters, and it's true, isn't it?
Yes, it's completely true, and that's really troubling and doesn't bode well when we have international players commenting on our, national security type things. And it also doesn't bode well from the perspective of we need a Prime Minister who starts as they mean to go on. And we can have a great relationship with China if it means that we're just a walkover, but we all know how dangerous that would be for our country, and that's not something that we want. We need a Prime Minister who's going to stand up for Australians, especially when our people are being hurt. I mean, that's the ultimate no-go. You don't do that. There's definitely a line drawn then, and we need Mr Albanese to stand up for Australians and stand up for our safety.
Well, it reminds me of about the very last words of the late Labor Senator Kimberley Kitching said just after lunch at my house. I said to her, is the Albanese government going to be as tough on China as it says, as the previous governments were? She looked at me like I was an idiot and said, hell no. Speaking of someone else who's close to Bill Shorten, his former Chief of Staff, Cameron Milner, he nailed this problem with this collapsing Albanese government in his column in the Australian today, Will. The whole piece is great, but let me just read out some of it. He said, Albanese's been distracted and simply not in the country enough for a leader supposedly dealing with the cost of living crisis. If not for the parliamentary sitting dates, Albo would no doubt find somewhere, anywhere else but Australia to fly in his plush Airbus that he reportedly calls Toto 1, named after his COVID-era pet dog. And Cameron Milner asked, when was the last time you saw the PM take a street walk and meet real Australians doing it tough? Now, Will, Milner has been close to Bill Shorten, and some might say, well, then it's sour grapes, here comes the successor. Or is that spot on?
It's pretty close, Andrew. The problem for Albanese is he doesn't know the man that he wants to be, or indeed the leader that he wants to be. He doesn't know whether he is that old leftist warrior from his youth, doesn't know whether he's going to fully embrace wokeism like the Democrats and the Labor Party in the UK. He doesn't know whether he should just be an old school Labor leader and focus on cost of living and helping the working class. He seems to not really know the type of Labor leader that he should be. And that's when you do start to just fall into the trappings of leadership like the celebrity handshakes and the travel, because they're the things that you associate with being a prime minister. But they're not the important things. The important things are actually how you go about leaving a legacy and helping people. And I don't think Albanese really knows how he can or should do that.
I think as a small town boy, suddenly thinking, oh my God, how good is this? it's gone to his head. Now, Louise, as you know, with the free speech challenges to you, I'm all for free speech. But I tell you what, it's being tested by the vile things I'm hearing from pro-Palestinian protesters, who, unlike the pro-Israel ones, so abusive, so threatening. New South Wales government is now tightening up its laws against hate speech. The Attorney General said it's specifically because of the tensions on our streets. I tell you, Louise, there's a cultural issue on that side of the debate that is really making me scared. I mean, it seems very different from the culture on the pro-Israel side.
Yes, well, we all know that there's a place and there's a need for these incitement of hatred, incitement of violence laws. But what happens is we need to make sure that they're not abused. And what we're seeing in Australia around the calls for genocide and things like that, that's absolutely the threshold that demands instant action. But we need to make sure, like I said, that laws like that are in place. The threshold set appropriately high. And we need to stamp out the behaviour that we're seeing. It's really, it's un-Australian and it's really dangerous and sad. So, I mean, all credit for taking action and making sure that people can come down swiftly on that behaviour, that terrible behaviour, but also hoping that the legislators and those implementing the legislation will always remember to make sure that threshold around curtailing free speech is appropriately high.
Yeah, Louise, I would say they might not need recourse to laws if people in positions of authority, cultural authority, spoke up instead of, like we're seeing with the Albanese government and so many other people as well. Louise Elliott, Will Kingston, thank you both so much for your time.